You alright, folks? Welcome back. And if you're new, nice to have you. So, we can pretty much surmise that Cataclysm is where Classic is going to go after ICC. If you've seen any of my other videos, you probably know I'd rather go the way of Classic Plus. Now, that's not a slight against Cataclysm. I'd be more than happy to play it. It's just that new bespoke content would definitely be my preference, and I think Classic Plus is this untapped well of potential, and it would be pretty wicked to see something in that vein. But again, Cataclysm is pretty much the safe and obvious bet here. But, with like every other form of Classic thus far, it won't be an exact carbon copy for one reason or another. And the further we get away from vanilla, the more willing Blizzard seem to be when it comes to tweaking certain quality of life factors, which isn't inherently a bad thing. It just depends on which version of the game you tweak and in what way. For example, and this was going to be its own point in this video, but with the ICC patch notes that dropped, Blizzard beat me to the punch, which I'm not mad about. I'm quite happy to see it coming, and that is account-wide mounts. Now, if this happened in vanilla or TBC, I wouldn't be on board with it. In those expansions, your mount is something you work towards. In vanilla, it's your epic mount, and having access to an epic mount for all your characters because one of them was able to afford it just wouldn't sit right, and it takes away from the vanilla experience in a pretty sizable way. The same goes for flying mounts in TBC. It's a big thing when you get it. Granted, they flipped where the gold gets dumped for mounts in TBC, so it probably wouldn't be as big a hoo-ha because you still got to fork out $5 to be able to ride your fast flying mounts, which is basically the system that would be used in every expansion thereafter. But in Wrath and Beyond, mounts are just not as big of a deal. If you haven't got an epic ground mount or fast flying, it's kind of on you at that point. Gold is hardly a scarce resource, and I'm not even saying that because of the advent of gold sellers and the WoW token. Just do some dailies for a week or two and you'll be away. And they have said, however they haven't yet provided specifics as to this comment, that the account-wide thing pertains to only most mounts. So what could this mean? Well, if I had to hazard a guess, I would say that everything apart from the Scarab Lord and Gladiator mounts will be account-wide. The Scarab Lord battle tank is pretty self-explanatory. It would devalue the rarest mount in the game if you saw a level 20 running around on it. That quest chain was monolithic and the reward was appropriate for it. I think it's safe to say that that one will remain character-bound. Same with Gladiator mounts. As of recording this, I have seen exactly one person with a Gladiator Frostworm of any kind. Now, because of that, I know that bloke's name. I see that dragon, I am 99% sure I know who it is, and that's the point, because he is the only person with that mount I've seen. It just commands the prestige a Gladiator mount should. The only other mount I can think of that might fit into this particular field is the Amani Warbear. Now, it's definitely not as rare or as interesting as the aforementioned mounts, but it is the only other mount I can think of that was briefly available and is no longer so. Perhaps Blizzard might want to maintain the fact this mount was meant to be a reward for completing a speedrun of an old raid, and don't want every low-level Muppet in Stormwind sat on one. The only problem I can see with this, though, is that they released a recolor in Cataclysm, and it wasn't really a massive change. It essentially boiled down to a hue shift. If the Battle Bear we get in the ZA5 man was a clear and distinct alteration, then I could definitely see limiting the Warbear as a decent idea. But the original was a bold red and orange, and the recolor was a sort of faded pink, and at a glance, you could easily confuse the two. If the recolor was a striking green or blue, well, the armor that is, on a white bear, then yeah, I'd get limiting the original. Hello, it's me in editing. So I was just testing out the PTR, getting some footage for the mount section and what have you, and I thought I'd give it a go on some lower level characters. So I ported over a level 22 Hunter and a level 70 Warrior. The Warrior doesn't have fast flying, and I want to test a few things. Turns out that at the moment on the PTR, the speed of the mount is tied to the mount itself and not your currently learned skill. So, for example, I got onto the Mechano Hog on the level 22 Hunter, and it was 100% speed, and that was something I found to be the case for any mount you would expect to be an epic ground mount. And same with the 70 Warrior, I hopped on a mount that you would only be able to use with a 280% riding skill, and it had 280%. However, that character never had fast flying. He only ever had slow flying. And on the character himself, actually, in the male, I got the 50 mount achievement mount from May Francis, and I was unable to learn it because I didn't have the prerequisite skill. So maybe this is something they will change before the phase hits, but I believe it was Cataclysm anyway, where they changed it that mount speed scales with your skill. So it shouldn't be a big thing, even if they don't. Anyway, back to the video. So then, what other quality of life improvements could we see in Cataclysm Classic? Well, there's the modern transmog system. If you're unaware, Cata is when the transmog system was first implemented in its most primitive form. Granted, it was in patch 4.3, which was the final patch of the expansion, which released nearly a year to the day after the expansion itself. But this time, I don't see why they wouldn't just give it to us from the start. But regardless of when they give us transmog, it would honestly be a smart move to give us the modern wardrobe system as opposed to the original, which again, if you didn't know, required you to have the physical items somewhere on the character, be that bags, bank, void storage, etc, etc. And that caused a lot of problems. Your bank space, and in some cases bag space, was permanently taken up by antiquated armor and weaponry because you wanted the appearance. And that appearance was then just limited to that character. This isn't so bad if you have a class set and only one of that class, but off-pieces and transmogs don't rely on tier sets. Yeah, it was a bit of a bitch. Legion gave us the wardrobe system, which meant an item that would be reasonably used by your character would be added to the wardrobe as a permanent option for transmog. So plate wearers couldn't sweep up every other type of armor. You had to be a clothy to get cloth appearances, a leather wearer for leather appearances, so on and so forth. And with this change to transmog, it was treated like any other collection system of the modern era, thereby being account-wide. If you got an appearance or put together a transmog on one character, you could, so long as they met the requirements, use that transmog on another character without having to farm it all over again. This freed up endless amounts of storage space for everyone, and ultimately the reasons they did this in Legion are still present in Cataclysm. People who like to change up their appearance will be faced with the ever so infuriating task of having ungodly amounts of old gear taking up space. And as someone who did this back in the day, if you want to change your transmog but you haven't got the space, you will need to sell or delete certain items in order to make the space. So if you ever want to go back to that deleted set, you need to refarm the pieces, and yeah, it quickly became very tedious, and to this day, there are appearances that I sold back then, I still haven't gotten back. What gives me hope that they will implement a modern transmog system is the fact they have announced they're doing account-wide mounts, pets, and heirlooms in Wrath's final patch. This was a Mists of Pandaria feature, so they're back porting it to expansions early. This could be because they don't expect Classic to reach Pandaria, so they might as well do it, or it's a case of they'd rather get this minor tweak out of the way now, so they can focus on bigger and better things in patches to come. The only thing that might be slightly controversial here is legendary weapons. Now, Blizzard didn't actually let us mod legendary weapons until fairly recently. Maybe it was to keep legendaries legendary, but Blizzard devalued what it meant to have a legendary long before the wardrobe system. My view is quite simple. If you've put in the man hours to get a Thunder Fury or a Shadowmourne, let them transmog it. You've got a cool thing, show it off. People sit around and dial around in Classic now anyway, with their warglaives on their back, so this just lets them do it in raids as well. Next up, I reckon an updated talent system wouldn't go amiss. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, I'm not calling for Dragonflight's talent trees to be unceremoniously crammed into Cataclysm. That wouldn't work for oh so many reasons, and it would just be a massive shit show. No. It's fair to say my favourite talent trees and what have you are actually the vanilla to Wrath ones, so I'm the last person you'd expect to call for such an abominable union, as I really like the one talent point a level thing, improving and building my character as I go. Even if I don't get a new ability to learn at a trainer every level, I get a new talent, and I can put it where I want. I just enjoy the relative freedom of that style of approach. With that said, though, there have been plenty of quality of life changes to talents over the years that don't have an impact on the talents themselves. Dragonflight in particular is kind of the culmination of all of them. So, what am I actually getting at? By the time we hit Cataclysm, talents are weirdly restrictive, whereas in expansions past, if you so desired, you could spread your talents evenly across all 3 trees. Would it be the most viable? Probably not, but that's your choice. You do as you please. In Cataclysm though, Blizzard trimmed the talent trees and reduced the amount of talent points you can acquire, now being a thing you get every couple of levels instead of every level, and locking you into a certain talent tree until you reached 31 points in said tree. And then the spare talents you have, you can put in a secondary tree of your choice. Whereas prior to Kata, if you were a hunter say, you could put your first 5 points in improved aspect of the hawk in the beast master tree, and then dump the next 40 levels worth in the marksman tree, or whatever other order you so wished. But in Cataclysm, this was just no longer possible. So yeah, Kata was definitely not my favourite way of doing talents, but it was certainly leagues better than the cookie cutter horror of the Mist of Pandaria system. Cataclysm still feels like it has a talent tree and not a talent shrub. But with that said, there are a few things that could be tweaked where talents are concerned that would overall just make things less restrictive and possibly lead to more interesting methods of play. This mainly revolves around the removal of paid talent point respecs and getting rid of dual spec in favour of what we got in future expansions where you can just change to the spec you wish. By Cataclysm anyway, the cost for dual spec was reduced from 1,000 gold to 10, which isn't even pocket change. That's the sort of money you find hiding down the back of the sofa. At that point, the gold investment to get dual spec is meaningless, so we may as well just be allowed to switch from spec to spec as we wish, or as a fight requires. And being able to change talents on the fly for free, and being able to set up numerous different presets, as you can currently do in Dragonflight, would be cool. You can have a PvP preset, AoE, single target, group healing, tank healing, etc, etc. Again, I'm not calling for the implementation of the current Dragonflight talent trees with all the modern abilities and what have you, but all the bollocks around it that removes arbitrary barriers to play would be a solid improvement to players' quality of life. They sort of did something similar to this with glyphs in Cataclysm. You still have to go out and acquire them, be it making them yourself or buying them from the auction house, but once you have them, you have them. You can then alter your glyphs from your pre-learned selection where applicable, changing up playstyles for fights where it was required. And yes, there was a resource cost of 1 dust of disappearance per change, but I think that could be scrapped as well. By Cataclysm, the age of reagents is either dead or dying, and it's just another annoyance. So this isn't exactly a mind-blowing alteration for Cataclysm, it's just an expansion on that approach. Now, there is something deep in the pit of my being that tells me someone will go, oh, but if you don't have a set in stone dual spec, you'll always be expected to carry around a set of gear for every spec. Let me address that particular train of thought now. No, you won't. You don't have to do that in retail. You won't have to do that here. Those who want to will. Those who want to only have one off spec, say, will. Those people existed before dual spec, and they existed after. This just removes any annoying obstacles in being able to play your character whatever which way you want. Reputations. Now, this one somewhat depends on who you are and how you approach WoW. But speaking personally and having spoken to guildies and friends over the years, this one would just save us all a bloody headache. Make the damn things account-wide. We'll be seeing account-wide pets, mounts, heirlooms, and so on, like I've mentioned. We already have account-wide enchants for the ones that require revered and so on. So you may be wondering, why would this even be worthwhile? Well, let me take you through this scenario. Say Cataclysm comes out. You've done all of the reps and related tomfoolery. 999 exalted with all of them. However, you turn out to be one of 5 DPS Death Knights in your guild. Now, no guild needs that many DPS DKs in one group. You could leave and look for pastures new, but maybe you've been with this guild a while. You're good mates with most of the people. The progress made, raid times, atmosphere and so on suit you down to the ground, and you aren't too fussed about changing character. Perhaps you actually have an ult that you want to level and would have in theory been your quote-unquote main ult. So after a discussion with the other DKs and officers, it's decided you will reroll to a Shadow Priest, for example, because the guild doesn't have one of those. But here's the issue. You've just spent the last couple of weeks since launch farming reputations for enchants and other pre-raid items in preparation for the raid tier's release. However, it's now only a few days away. You won't have the time to redo all of that rep farming in the interim. In a scenario where things are done as they currently are, you'd be screwed. I'm not saying rep gear is the be-all or end-all, but certainly for those early stages of a release, they really help and are usually either heroic dungeon or early raid equivalent, so they are items you will notice when you don't have them. And obviously, with the example given, we are relying on the fact that all relevant parties didn't notice the excess of DPS DKs until the last minute. On the flip side though, you have a version of the game where reputations are account-wide. Fantastic! And you are able to access all of those useful items for your new main immediately. You have put the effort in, you have achieved exalted status. You aren't skipping a queue or being lazy. You've done this content, but you're an average player. Why should you be expected to spend another few weeks doing what you've just done when you can do a couple of days just doing dungeons? Getting as much gear as you can before that raid comes. At least you'll have your rep gear and as much heroic dungeon gear as can be expected. Now I know that you've got your tab art in Kata, so you will get rep doing dungeons anyway, but you ain't going to get exalted with everything in 2 days. And when you get round to playing an ult or something later in the expansion, you can just go sweep up some easy rep gear and get started with whatever it is you want to do. You aren't then held back by the tedium of refarming the same reputations again and again and again and again. And because mounts and other collectibles will already be account-wide by that stage, it's not like they will look to restrict you getting your hands on, say, the camel mounts from Ramkehen. You'll have access to those anyway, so how would this work? Well, coding and other game design things aside, I don't think it would be an overly obvious thing like, say, Dragonflight reps, and I don't think being able to contribute to an account-wide pool would work in Cataclysm. My view is it would just be a case of your highest ranking character with that reputation unlocking the rewards for your entire account, irrespective of what that rep then says on an ult. So again, say your main is exalted with Therazane, but your alt druid is only honoured. Because you have that exalted main, your druid can still access all the rewards from revered and exalted because a character on your account has just reached that goal. Again, not sure how you'd go about that from, a technical design perspective, but from a quality of life one, it would just reduce the amount of friction for re-rolling and playing an ult. At the end of the day, most people play an ult to see a different side of WoW. They aren't going to see that new side of things if they're busy doing the dailies they did a few months ago for the exact same rewards. Final thing from me then. Achievements. Again, something we would go on to see in future expansions. Just make them account-wide. In retail, you can contribute to a number of achievements on multiple characters, and even for those that you can't, the rewards generally are still accessible. It links in with what I said about reputations. People rarely want to go back and do the same kind of content over and over and over again for the exact same reward. I know some folk out there might be like, well, that's what you do when you raid. Clearing raids to improve player power is one thing, and if you're doing it on different characters of different specs and classes, you're not always going to be going after the exact same item every time. But doing Glory of the Ulduar Raider 5 times is just a completely different kettle of fish. Similar to what they have said about what they will do for mounts in making most account-wide. Make most achievements and their respective rewards account-wide. Don't allow someone who completed the Scarab Lord chain to have that title on an ult. Like I said for the mount, devalues it. But if someone has killed Algalon on a character and they've changed main for Cataclysm, them having access to the Astral Walker title isn't going to make it any more or less impressive. And frankly, speaking for myself here, some of my favourite cosmetic rewards would not have been achievable, for me at least, without account-wide progress. As I mentioned in a recent video, mount farming was my go-to activity outside of raiding for a very long time, and so much so, it was what I was known for in my guild at the time. I was in that guild for many, many years, and that was probably the one thing you could accurately pin on me: mounts. In Legion, the 300 mount achievement became a thing. For this achievement, you got the Heavenly Azure Cloud Serpent, a worthy mount for such a milestone and a very cool beastie. Sadly, I prefer the Onyx version, but you also got the title Lord of the Rains. Now, I was on my Hunter at the time I got the achievement. He was also my namesake character for many, many years. Regardless of what I mained, he was what I was known as, and this title on him is something I have not changed since the day I got it. And to me, that's both a very important thing for that character and just a very important achievement overall. Yes, there are more impressive feats out there, there's no doubt about it. But I was a mount farmer. That was the ultimate status symbol of the time. I didn't know anyone else who had it personally. I'd seen the odd person here or there with it, but in my immediate circle, I was the only one. And I wouldn't have reached that goal, at least not when I did, without account-wide progress. And if I so wish, I can use it on any number of my ults after the fact. And it's not that the effort wasn't put in and it was an undeserved achievement, but that particular achievement would feel far too laborious if I had to do it on every character. Farming Invincible, Ashes, doing all the raid meta achievements over and over, it just wouldn't be possible. I'd have no time for anything else. And this could be the case for any achievement and any reward. Again, I appreciate some achievements and some rewards are meant to be rarer and an actual feat when you see them out and about. But if you've completed all the Brewfest achievements on one character, do you really need to go and do it on all your others because you like that title? It might in theory mean you play more, but would that playtime then be satisfactory? And that's where quality of life comes in. It's very much like achievements in vanilla and TBC. The first, second, and at a stretch, third time, you might really enjoy it. Times 4, 5, and 6, you'll probably want to strangle someone. I'm not saying achievements or achievements are bad. Again, the first or second time you do something, it can be a very positive experience. And ultimately, if the reward is something you want, the journey should be worth it to a degree. But when you have to complete that same journey to get to the same reward for every character, the positivity quickly fucks off. Now, I know I've suggested a fair number of things that are currently present in retail in one form or another, and for a lot of people that sheer notion alone turns them off, which, it's a bit silly. I'm not saying I want Classic to become retail. I play Classic because it feels more like the game I know and love, and is for me a far more satisfying world to be in, from leveling to the raids and how my character plays. But despite that, I'm not a complete muppet. Retail does have some good points, and a lot of quality of life features came into being after years of iteration and experimentation and paved the way for things like the modern transmog system. We could go into Cataclysm with the original transmog system, for example, but with the comparison of what we have in retail, it would just feel clunky and bloated and outdated, and this can extend to pretty much everything else on this list. If I farmed all the rep I need on one character, I probably don't want to have to do that a second time. If my main has Lore Master, there is not enough coin, real or otherwise, that would make me do that thing again. But if I've done it the first time, I'd probably like the title, or the tabard, or something to that effect. Maybe I'd like it on an alt, but it's just taken me months to finish that achievement once. God knows how long it would take me to do it a second time. On retail, I wouldn't have to. I've done it once. My account is credited as having done it. Therefore, any toon, past, present, or future, has access to the rewards. And that alone is good enough for me in a version of WoW where this stuff is prevalent. Said earlier in the video, a lot of this wouldn't fly on a vanilla or TBC server, and frankly I wouldn't want it to. Those versions of the game don't need these specific changes. well, maybe the talents one wouldn't go amiss, but either way, we are past that stage of Classic now. And I think having access to features that only go on to respect our time and investment far more than they currently do is only a good thing. And not a single item on this list, other than the already confirmed account-wide collectibles, may come to fruition. But I think at least a couple of these ideas are safe bets. Anyway, that's me. Let me know your own thoughts down below. If you'd be so kind as to like, sub, share with your pals and so on, that'd be grand. Have a good one, folks. Bye for now.